Here we are, Sunday morning, fifth or sixth week of what we think of being quarantine, and really we have a lot to worry about. And if there's anything that makes us worry, it would be locked up in the house with nothing to do. Can you imagine a better scenario for worry than that? Several years ago, I went to a conflict resolution conference. And I will never forget, in one of the breakout sessions, one of the gentlemen who was teaching the breakout session, he shared this story. And he was probably 60 years old, and he said, when I was 50 years old, he decided he would change his life, and I guess everybody does that once in a while. But he said his entire life he had been a negative person. A negative person. He said, it was in his DNA, it was his personality. He said it was his temperament. He said everything about me was negative. And of course, negative people don't know they're negative. He said, I didn't know I was negative. He said, I just thought I was being realistic about everything. He said, I just didn't see myself as being a negative person. He said, I was in therapy or counseling with my wife. My marriage was splitting up. Can you imagine? And he said, for the first time in my life, somebody confronted me with the reality that I was a negative person by nature. That I didn't choose to be, didn't necessarily want to be, by virtue of my nature, my temperament, my personality. Everything about me was negative. I didn't know that I lived in this 20% of everything that could go wrong. But he said, I lived there. I thought that way. I dreamed that way. And he said, everything in my life, he said, I viewed in this 20% of everything that's potentially negative. And he said, for me, that was the entire universe. And he said, this counselor confronted me with that, and it made me angry at first. But he said, I began to look at my life, and I began to look at my relationships. And inevitably, everything in my life, I focused on what I didn't like about something, what I didn't like about a person, what I didn't like about my job, what I didn't like about my house, what I didn't like about my car. It was always the negative that I saw. And he said, as we calculated it, it was really about 5 or 6% of everything that I saw that way. And here was this other 90% that had the possibility and the potential of being good. But he said, I never even saw that. He said it was like a dog whistle I couldn't hear. It was a colors on the spectrum that I couldn't see. He said it was just impossible for me to comprehend there was this other 90% of everything that I didn't see until he confronted me. And he said, you live in this one place where it could go wrong, it might go wrong, it has the possibility of go wrong. And he said, that's all you see. It's all you see in anything and in everything. And he said, there's this other whole universe that potentially is good. And he said, I made a decision that I was going to change. And he said, 3 years of counseling. And he said, I finally overcame it. He said, it was the most difficult thing I have ever done in my life. Most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. But he said it was just how I saw the world. And you know what? It's easy to see the situation we're in all the possibilities that could go wrong, maybe would go wrong, could go wrong, probably will go wrong. It's easy to see all of that. And you know that Jesus anticipated this day in our lives. He anticipated it. When I was in school, I took a class in theater, of all things. And I learned about storyboards. Never knew what storyboards were. But in Hollywood, every time they make a movie, it's not just a script, but there's a storyboard. Meaning there is this board in which they have frames and little pictures and all kinds of things. And I made this storyboard for our sermon today. And this is how this worked. Let's just assume for a moment that I wanted a sailboat. That I wanted a sailboat. And I came to my wife and I said, I want a sailboat. And she said, well, you can't even sail. So the first thing here is me taking sailing lessons. Sailing lessons. The second thing is me convincing her that I now know how to sail. Yeah. The third thing over here is me looking for a sailboat, so you can see it for sale. Sailboat. The fourth thing is I've actually got one, got a sailboat. The fifth thing is me sitting on the sailboat. And the sixth thing is me winning the America's Cup in sailing. So this is a storyboard. You see, it has all of these different phases sort of laid out in it. And you can see the progression of this. I know this, that when I lay down to sleep at night, there is this negative storyboard in my head right now about everything that's going on in our lives. I mean, everything. Everything. I mean, even if I never get corona, what's going to happen to the economy? Have you ever noticed the people that have shut down the economy continue to get paid? They've got jobs. Yeah, they've got jobs. So how is the economy going to come back? I mean, it took us 60 years to build this thing. So there's this storyboard in my head that's negative. You know, phase by phase by phase. I can just see it. Yeah, I can just see it. And you know, I go to sleep and I wake up in the middle of the night and there is another storyboard of all the possibilities of things that could go wrong. Yeah, it's in there. It's in there. Well, you know, Jesus anticipated that would happen to me just like it happens to you. And so he gives us this scripture in Matthew. And you know, this is not a joke. I mean, this is not just some homily or poetry or nice thing to say. It is how he intended for us to live our lives. So in Matthew chapter 6, this is what he says. Therefore, I say to you, I don't want you to worry about your life. Well, that's easy to say. I mean, I don't choose to worry. I don't sit around and think, oh, for a moment here, I'm going to take time out to worry. I don't do that. I mean, it's natural to worry. But here he says to me, therefore I tell you, don't worry about your life. What you'll drink, what you'll eat, about your body, what you'll wear. And then he does this. He gives us his own storyboard. See? He gives us his own storyboard. It's not as if he just sticks it there and says, here, deal with this. He gives us a storyboard for us to think about. And this is that storyboard. Here's a guy that's just scared to death. And he says, don't worry. So what is the difference between being afraid and worry? Well, fear, I believe, is focused on something. Something probably even real. Worrying doesn't have to have anything real. Doesn't have to have any evidence. Doesn't have to have ever happened. And the other thing is, it's perpetual. It continues and continues and continues. It just goes on forever. Yeah, it does that. It just goes on forever. And it has no reason to it. It's hard to resolve. You can say, I'm not going to worry, and yet you worry. So Jesus gives us his own storyboard, and he says, look at the birds. Look at the birds. Now, I've got some beautiful birds up here. They're fat. There's two of them. They're sitting there, and they look like they're in love. Jesus chooses to use these examples because, I mean, honestly, there's probably nothing less value than birds. And probably, at least visually in our life, there's probably nothing that there are more of. And he says, look at the birds. Look at the birds. Do I not take care of them? You see, he puts them in the storyboard for us so that he gives us a storyboard. He said these things like what you're going to eat, what you're going to wear, all of these kind of things about your life. He said this is what the pagans do. You see, if being a believer in Jesus doesn't matter, then you've been misled. You've been misled because this does matter. He intended, you see, for us to plug into this in a real way. So he gives us this storyboard. He said that's like the pagans do. I have a picture of a homeless man here. Strangely enough, though, he's got his cell phone plugged into the outside wall of a Starbucks. Only in America. Only in America. He said we worry about what we're going to wear. I put in the internet what we're going to wear. A couple things came up. And right here is 6 ladies, and the caption on this is, what to wear to the airport. Yes, there is actually fashion statements, fashion designs on what you wear to the airport. Yeah. Then I decided to look at the wealthiest people in the world and what they wear. And so I have Bill Gates, Bezos, and Zuckerberg, got all 3 of them. And I'm telling you, it's pathetic what they have on. T-shirts, shorts. I mean, honestly, Bill Gates looks like he visited Goodwill. And so, you see, maybe when you financially have unlimited ability, that doesn't matter. Here's what he wants us to do. He wants us to see him as our unlimited ability. I have this basis to work with. Everything sits on top of him saying to me, don't worry, because I am going to take care of you. Probably 30 years ago, I was fascinated by Dr. Martin Luther King, and I've always and continue to go to school. Always. And continue. In a program right now. And I decided that I wanted to write something about Dr. Martin Luther King that had not been written, and I decided to write on the theology of Dr. Martin Luther King. And strangely enough, there wasn't a lot written on Dr. Martin Luther King and his theology. And I began to search and call and write letters and make inquiries, and it seemed as if everybody had written his speeches, but no one ever talked about the theology of Dr. Martin Luther King. And one time I was making phone calls, and I called the center in Atlanta, and this lady said, you know what? I have a name for you. And she said, I want you to call this man. His name was Junius Griffith. And she said, I believe he's who you need to talk to. And I said, well, who was he? She said, well, in 1958, 59, he was a reporter for the New York Times and went to hear Dr. King speak and became his editor, speech editor. And I thought, I wonder why I've never heard of this man. So I called the number that she gave me, and oddly enough, he was a teacher, an instructor, a professor at the University of Michigan. And he picked up the phone, and I said, Professor, I said, I'm doing this. I'm writing something on Dr. King's theology, and I was just wondering if I could talk to you. And he said, sure. He said, come on down. And he said, or come on up. He said, I would be glad to sit and talk with you about Dr. King. Now, this is what I've noticed. The people who actually write the speeches never say they do. And the people that say they did probably didn't. And this is a person I'd never heard of. And yet he was in this inner circle, but he never said anything about it. And when I was having lunch with him, I said, Dr. Griffin, I said, how is it that Dr. King was different? Because I said, at the time, there were many civil rights leaders, and there were a lot. We just don't hear about it. And he said, I'm going to tell you this. He said, Dr. King actually believed the stuff he read that Jesus said. You know, like turn the other cheek, say good things about people that say bad things about you. He said he literally believed that. And so this is what he thought. He said he believed that if you didn't strike back, that you obligated God to defend you. He said he believed that. He said he honestly believed that. And he said when people would hit him, strike him, spray him with hoses, write bad things about him, he never responded. He said, if I don't respond, he said it obligates God. And he lived that way. Here's the point. Jesus said, I say to you, don't worry about these things. Don't worry about it. Am I going to believe that, or am I just going to quote that? Am I going to do that, or am I just going to read that? This is what I know about Jesus. To take a phrase from Dr. King, Jesus had been to the mountain and seen the other side. See? Jesus knows how this is going to end. Jesus has already seen how this plays out. And I'm going to trust him with it. When he says, don't worry, you can read it, you can quote it, you can talk about it, or you can believe it.